Okay, so you moved to Pearl River, New York, and you were 14 years old?
Yes, and I was unhappy. It's an entirely different life. I left Allentown with all my friends that I liked, my grandmother, where I was comfortable and loved, and we, Pearl River was a very small and somewhat of an unfriendly type of town. I was the outsider. Now, being a boy, and this goes with males mainly, I was challenged because I was the new boy on the block. I ended up having to fight about 10 different guys for no reason but just the fact that I moved to Pearl River. I had to fight Jack Sarvin, Jack Bowman, Russell Knapp, and others.
What grade were you in?
Eighth, well, I brought up into the eighth grade.
Huh.
And uh, yeah, it was the beginning of the eighth. So, as I said, that I had to fight. This is a normal thing when you're the new boy on a block, and I didn't like Pearl River at all. It was a different group. They made fun of the words I used. They had like a different pronunciation of certain words, but that goes with the situation when you move. And anyhow, I assimilated into the lifestyle there, and they you must remember, think of it this: we had no TV then. Uh, there was no computers. The only outside entertainment there was a small one theater in the town of Pearl River called the Central Theater. And that would have the movies. They would change I think they would have like three different movies a week.
And that was the one in the center of the town, or the?
It was in the center of the town on Central Avenue. Just one of many of hundreds of thousands of small theaters spread out throughout the United States. That was the big entertainment of the time. And they did what in Allentown they never did. They did a lot of ice skating, and my folks got me a pair, and I started to ice skate down a little pond down the road called Gardner's Pond, and that was the big event, of course, in the winter.
You were living at 8 Franklin Avenue.
Where I lived in a small apartment to begin with was on Ridge Street.
Okay.
We rented an apartment, and so my folks would get a vacation twice a year. They would have one in November. For my father wanted to go down to his folks there in Delaware to hunt, and my mother would go to Allentown, and they would take me out of school. They would make up a story that one of the grandmoms was very sick, and they went there to see her and take care of her a couple days. So that got me out of school. And I would go with them in the summer. They had a summer vacation. Well, of course, that wasn't a problem with the school. It was okay. I went down in the summer, and my father come up with that idea a lot earlier, by the way, that he would send me down to the farm. And I forgot to bring that up. When I lived in Allentown, when I was around 7 or 8, my father would arrange for me to go down to the farm and spend the summer rather than on the streets of Allentown. And the farm was another world. I come out of Allentown with electric, running water, and toilets, and radio. He brought me down to his folks' farm. There was no running water. There was no electric. There was nothing. It was a farm, poor people out in the country. My mother and father would give them a few bucks for me to stay there for the summer. The only thing that saved me down there was my cousin Billy. He was the child I mentioned, was the son of my father's older brother Bill. And they raised Billy as their own for some reason. I was never quite sure why, but somehow he ended up staying with his grandparents during his young life up into manhood. But I loved Billy. Billy was a country bumpkin. He didn't know anything, but he was a simple guy, and I was a hotshot, streetwise kid from Allentown. But I enjoyed the life because it was so different. We would go fishing down at what they call, it was a brick kiln. It was a place that they had taken a lot of ground out, and it had filled with water for years, and it had these fish called sunnies, little fish, not big fish, but sunnies, which some of them were big enough to eat. And they would have, every year, they had what was called a country fair, which was a very, very big affair down there. It was something to look forward to, and it was. It was quite large. And, as I said, down in Delaware again, the language was very different. Everybody was different. And I had cousins down there. And my Aunt Mary, my father's younger sister. There was Aunt Bertha, who lived a few miles away, and her name was Bertha Moore. She was married and had a large family. Aunt Mary, who married a musician called Jimmy Emerlin, who was great, a great fiddle player and banjo player and all of that. And he organized what you want to call these country bands. Then they ended up, my Aunt Mary and Uncle Jim, going around the country in those days for all over, appearing at fairs and getting on the radio and appearing in different movies as an added attraction to play a few country songs. And as I said, my summers were pleasantly spent down there. Then back to Pearl River. My mom and dad would come down, take me back to Pearl River and back to school. And I ended up with 2 or 3 great friends in Pearl River. One of my first friends was called, we call him Bud, Charles Helmke. And he was my first, friend in Pearl River. Then the second one was Newt Guyett. He was a French-Canadian family, lived on Ridge Street. And Newt and I and Bud became very close. The third one was Whitey Carl, Robert Carl, but he called him Whitey because he had very, very white hair. And that was his nickname.
How old were you about this time?
Well, I was going in, I became 9 and then 10 and up the line, of course, with time. And
what do you mean, grade? 9th to 10th grade?
Well, yes, I got to the 10th. And then
what about girls? Did you date or girls? What about girls?
No, I didn't become what you want to say hooked with any particular young girl. It just didn't seem to happen. In those days, the boys hated the girls and the girls hated the boys, it seemed.
Did you get in trouble with your friends? Did you
No.
do a lot? No?
No, they were good kids. I mean, we didn't do anything that got us into any trouble.
Well, besides the movies, what did you do to keep yourself entertained?
Basically, we didn't do much. We just would hang around and talk. They would come up to where I lived, and we would sit and talk, or we'd take a walk through town, go up to the ice cream. They had an ice cream parlor called Umlin's. And it was a nice place. You could go in there and you would get a dish of ice cream or get a ice cream cone. But basically, we didn't do too much. We weren't into sports, and that was kind of unusual. The Cornishers never were into sports for some reason. The only sports they loved was hunting and fishing and trapping. That was their big lives. Of course, in Pearl River, I started to trap, and I caught a few coons that my father helped me skin out, and I caught a few muskrats, and we would put them on. You put the hides on stretchers to dry. And after they got good and dry, we would send them to a Taylor Fur Company down in St. Louis. I think it was St. Louis, Missouri, the best of my remembrance. I think it was. And of course, they would send you a check. Well, naturally, they never sent you much because you sent it to them, and they could put any price on it. And they sure as hell weren't going to give you a big price. I can tell you that.
To go back to the school. To go back to the school, was there different factions? Like there was jocks, as we call them today. Was there factions?
Well,
like that?
yes, the football players were quite popular. The basketball players were very popular.
Was there any conflicts or fights with the jocks and the non-jocks?
Yes, there was a few. And the coach was a mean son of a bitch named Shuttleworth. He beat me with a club because I gave some smart answers to the teacher or something. And she turned me in, and his job was to beat the kids or boys who acted up. Well, I pissed this one teacher off. I forgot her name, Mary McDonough. And she turned me in, and I had to report to him, and that bastard beat me with a club.
What do you mean a club? Where did he beat you?
Well, a big paddle. And I resented that because he was like the main executioner of the school. That was his job. But he was a mean bastard to begin with. I didn't care for him. He didn't particularly care for my group because we weren't that interested in sports. We didn't go out for baseball. We didn't go out for football. We sort of ignored sports. And it came up to the point where, as I said, I was in the 9th grade, and I was going to turn 16 soon. So I didn't even bother taking the 9th grade, what they call the Regents in New York. Regents was their system of grading children in school. And I dropped out. I was 16. So there was what they call sort of a medical plant that made medicines called Letterly's, which was right alongside of Pearl River, right up the road. And they hired a lot of young guys. They had thousands or hundreds of rabbits and guinea pigs that they used for testing their medicines. But they would hire what they call rabbit boys. You were hired at 16, and your job was to feed and water rabbits. They had them all separate pens, hundreds of them. And you got a few bucks, not much, but I worked there for a few months. And then when it came that November, I quit school in June. And I worked up until November, and I said, to hell with it. I went down to Grandmom and Grandpa's farm for hunting and trapping. And I stayed down there up until February or March of 1940, let me think this out, 1941, yeah. Well, I come back to Pearl River and I hung around. and nothing much took place. Uh, I came back. Yeah, it was in 1940, fall of 41. And of course, the big thing was along come December 7th, which was Pearl Harbor Day.
All right, just to go back, when you came back, did you go out with your same friends?
Yep,
And
we all hung out together.
after girls then, or not?
No,
Not so much?
not really. No, we just, like I say, we lived in a small town. It seemed that the girls in the small town went for the boys in other towns, and the boys in the small town would go for girls in the other towns, because I think they were sick of seeing each other.
When you came back from Delaware, you were how old? 16 or 17, you said?
16.
So you weren't able to drive yet in New York.
My father would let me drive his car. I got a junior
Yeah,
license.
junior license.
Yeah.
And where'd you get that? Right in Pearl Harbor, you got the junior license?
Pardon?
Where did you get the license from?
New City, New York,
New City.
which was what you would call the county seat.
Okay.
And like I say, I didn't do much, only in the daytime. And as I said, when the war hit, I was only 16. And there was a tremendous change. Food rationing, sugar, gasoline, different things, tires.
You listened to the radio most often.
The radio, well, I went to the movies on December 7th, 1941. And they had a wonderful movie there called Sergeant York with Gary Cooper. Sergeant York had been quite a World War I hero. He captured, I think, 130 Germans by himself. But anyhow, so when I come home from the movies, my dad was sitting listening to the radio. We had a radio. And he said, "What did you think about Pearl Harbor?" And I said to my father, What's Pearl Harbor?" He said, "It's our big Navy base out in the Hawaiian Islands. It's been bombed and many ships have been sunk and a lot of men have been killed." And I said, "No, I didn't hear anything about it." But starting that day, our lives were changed.
We'll go back to the rationing. I mean, when did the rationing start?
Right away.
I mean, before Pearl Harbor.
No.
Right at Pearl Harbor.
After. Right away, though. Tires. You couldn't, my father had a terrible time trying to find and buy. You would try to find somebody who has a couple tires extra, and you would buy them. My father kept them under his bed.
Well, the
He
stores
had 2 or 3 tires under his bed.
the stores are rationing. They have signs outside the stores saying you can only have this much food, or
Well, they gave you. Well, first of all, the government gave everybody. You had to go to this office, and they gave you what calls a ration book, and you could take. You had to take a coupon, a ration stamp, and you get your 5 pounds of sugar, and coffee, and like I say, sugar, coffee. Tires, gasoline. That was a big problem. Gasoline. But it led to a lot of crookedness, and I'll tell you how that worked. Gasoline was only 12 cents or 13 cents or whatever a gallon. And the stations were pissed off because they would only give you, the government would only give you so many gallons a week to go to work. But most of the gas stations, for a few bucks extra, you got gas. It was illegal, but they did it. Everybody was doing it. So instead of the 10 gallons a week you were to get, you could buy extra. And they did. Like when my father wanted to go to on vacation, he would get enough gas to get down there. And that helped out in Delaware because farmers, this was another thing, farmers got all the gas they wanted.
Hmm.
Naturally, okay. And my Uncle Dick didn't have a tractor. He didn't need gas, but they would get gas. They had a big tank put in the yard, and they would get gasoline. Well, when my father would come down, naturally they had all the gas in the world. Because Uncle Dick would and Grandpa Corns, they filled the tank with the gas, which they didn't use because they didn't have a tractor. But they used it for their car, of course. They had a car. But like I said, it was always X number of gallons way over. So that wasn't a problem.
Well,
but it was a problem in towns. Like I say, it led to what's called a lot of black. The word came up then was called black marketing. That was a new term, but that's what it was termed as. And it was, of course, looked upon as quite unpatriotic, but that was the way it was.
So December 7th, 1941, and you were going to turn 17 that Christmas.
No, I turned 16 that Christmas. Okay. I didn't turn 17 until the following. That was 1940, let me get this straight. I was born in 26, that would be 36, that would be 14, that'd be 15. Yeah, I'll be going on 42. Yeah, 42, December, I turned 17.
So between,
no,
when the war...
I'm wrong. I turned, 16 I turned in 1942 December. All right. I turned 17 in December of 1943.
So you were only 15
now,
years old.
I was old enough to join the Navy.
You were only 15 years old when they bombed Pearl
Yes.
Harbor.
So I turned 17 and I raised hell about my...
No, go ahead.
Huh?
Go ahead. Continue.
Oh, as I say, I come into a part of my life, we were all Navy crazy. All my group, most of the guys even I remembered from Allentown, they didn't want to march. They didn't want to live in tents. They liked the Navy uniform. It was quite glamorous. And we all wanted Navy.
So you were still hanging around with
Charlie Helmke and Newt Guyot. But they were a year younger than me. So they weren't interested at that time, which they both did later. But they didn't go into it like me. Now, I was 17 in December. I raised a lot of hell with my mother and father. I wanted them to sign.
Well, what were you doing in the meantime between the war started, December 7, 1941?
I delivered mail. I got a job in the post office when I come back, and that was that...
Come back from Delaware.
Come back from Delaware.
And after the war started.
And, yeah, and I would deliver registered and special delivery mail.
Right from the New York...
On my bicycle.
From the Pearl River Post Office.
My folks got me a bicycle that early summer, which I took to Delaware and also brought back. But the post office job, I would get to the post office around 8 o'clock, and some of the mail was there. For special delivery, it was called. Special delivery and registered, which people had to sign for. Now, on my bicycle, winter and snow, rain, I would go to the different addresses, and some was a long way, say, in the back end of town.
Mm-hmm.
And I would deliver it, come back at noon and pick up more, and do it again. And I got so much a letter. Okay. Now,
During this time, your parents were still at Rockland State Hospital.
no, we had that apartment in Pearl River on Ridge Street.
Okay.
Yeah, but they worked at Rockland.
That's what I mean.
All right. So now, as I said about the post office, and I worked there until I turned 17. Then I started raising hell. I wanted to go in the Navy. I went to New York City every other day. It was cheap, to what they call the Navy Department, and I would sign my father's name. Well, they got wise to me, and they wouldn't let me even in.
So you had forged your father's name, and they knew immediately?
Well, they picked up on it because they didn't trust it.
How many times did you do this?
Oh, 5 or 6 times or more.
How did you get to the city?
On the bus.
Okay.
They had a regular bus line that went to the George Washington Bridge. Then you got on the 8th Avenue subway down to Times Square, and you went over to 7th Avenue, and the Navy Department was there.
Did you go with anybody?
Hmm?
Did you take somebody with you sometimes?
No, I'd go by myself. So one night, a knock came at my father's door. He opened it up, and there was a Navy officer. And I looked at him, and he was a teacher, had been a teacher in Pearl River High School. And he looks at me and he says, "I'm here because of you, Richard."
Do you remember his name?
Huh?
Do you remember his name?
No, I'm blocking.
What?
But he was out of the school. He was in the Navy. Somehow he was stationed. His office was down in New York City, but he would come home to Pearl River every night. Okay, he was lucky. So he says, "I'm going to talk to your father." So my father, yeah, what did he do? Well, he didn't really do anything, but he's down to the Navy Department signing up or bothering them constantly about getting in.
Did he tell him about you forging his name?
Hmm?
Did he mention to your...
Yes, he said he said the Navy wasn't going to make anything of it, but they said to my father, the Navy would appreciate, due to the fact that they have a war, to keep him out of the Navy Department at 7th Avenue. So my father said, yes, okay. So I didn't go anymore. But then I got very frustrated. Come around March, I turned around, I went back down to the farm. I was angry. That was December when I was 17.
How did you get to the farm?
My folks would take me to the Newark train station, and I would ride it to Harrington, Delaware.
So you went down by yourself?
Yeah,
okay.
And I spent the winter hunting and trapping, and living at Grandpa Cornish's farm. So in March, I came back to Pearl River, and March of '44. And I raised all kinds of hell. I wanted to go in that Navy. No. So I took a chair and I smashed it on their table. And the food went flying. My father, he was a big, powerful man. He had arms, he had Popeye arms, I call them, like Popeye the sailor. Big, heavy, husky arms, and he was a toughie. He was in charge of the most criminal ward at Rockland State Hospital. But anyhow, my father looked up at me and said, "I'll sign." Well, my mother went bonkers. "You son of a bitch, if something happens to him, I'll kill you, you bastard," and blah, blah, blah. And my father was being more than reasonable. He told my mother, he said, "Nellie, he's gonna go, they're gonna draft him in a few months. So it's best that he goes. We can't put up with this."
So at that time, it didn't seem to people that the war was winding down at all.
No, It
Not at
was
all.
the beginning. I mean, it was hot.
It was hot at that time.
Oh,
still. Even though
very,
it was 1944.
very, very. This was the spring of '44, and
Were they paying attention more to the German front
yes,
as opposed to the Pacific?
no, both.
Both.
It was pretty well equal.
Is equal. Okay.
Yeah, it was, but it was two different kind of wars.
Mm.
The European War had towns and people. The Pacific War had nothing but headhunters and palm trees.
Right.
But anyhow, so as I said, my father agreed. He said, "I'll sign."
What does that mean? So the
That
next day.
he went to New York with me the next day, and he signed. He went in and he signed, and he looked at me and he says, "You want me to sign?" I said, "Yeah." And I said to myself, "I really fixed the old man. I fixed him good."
What was Nan's attitude that morning before?
Huh?
What day of the week was this? Were they both home from work?
It was just a Monday. They were off.
And what did your mom say when she knew you and Gramps was
Well,
heading
she
to the
finally
city?
gave up.
Really?
She raised hell, but then she just shut up about it. Anyhow, we went down and signed me up. All right. Now we jump to Violet Taylor. That Sunday, I went to the Pearl River Theater, and I was up in the balcony with our Newt and Charlie Humphrey Bud, and I looked, and there was this red-haired girl standing on the steps, and she was talking to another red-haired girl, and I'm looking at her, and I said, "Wow." To me, she was beautiful. And I'm looking at her, and she went downstairs, and then she came back up with candy it was her sister and her sister's boyfriend, Jean. Her sister's name, I'm blocking right now. But anyhow, so that was it. Now, I had signed up for the Navy, but the Navy didn't take you at once. It would be a couple of weeks before they put you in. So we found out that they had dances down at what's called the Park Ridge High School on a certain afternoons every week. So we decided to go down to Park Ridge, which we took a bus. It's only in the next town there. Got off, and we walked up to the high school, and we're looking in the window, and I look, and I see this red-haired girl walk across the floor, and I said, "That's the girl I saw at the Pearl River Theater." So in we went. Well, I saw where she was sitting, and I maneuvered myself up to where she was sitting and sat next to her. So I turned my attention to talking to her.
Did she recognize you from the movie theater?
No.
Okay.
I didn't tell her. I made on like, "Oh, how are you? It's nice. Who are you?" Blah, blah, blah. So, believe it or not, I dated her. We made arrangements. She gave me her phone number and gave me her address, blah, blah, blah. And we set up a date for that Friday. Of course, I was all excited. My dad let me use the car, and I got ready that Friday. Even took a bath, which was unusual. No. Anyhow.
Was this your first official date? This wasn't your first official date with a girl, though, was it?
Yes. It was what you would call my first formal date with a young lady, a young girl. Okay. So I picked her up at her house. I met her people. And I had decided the best thing to do, we went to a movies in Suffern. So we went up there and saw this idiotic movies. And
What was it? Do you remember?
no, it was about some Dennis Morgan was an Irish guy who was a good singer, and it was about somebody who wrote songs in his lifetime. I forget the name. After the movies, we went down to my mom and dad's, and we sat there and talked, and I introduced her to my folks, and I was quite excited because I began to be sorry that I had signed up for the Navy, because I thought there was a possibility with me and this girl that it becoming serious, and it was. She was very interested in me. I was very interested in her. Of course, I was quite good looking, no wonder. But, so anyhow, we went out a few times doing the same thing, and lo and behold, here come the letter from the Navy. It's time for you.
How soon after you initially signed
About
up?
3 weeks, and I didn't like it. But anyhow, the letter told me to be in the Pennsylvania station at 8 o'clock on I think it was a Sunday. 6 o'clock on a Sunday in April 17th. Anyhow, so Newt Guyett, me, Mom and Dad, and Violet Taylor, we rode down to the city, got on the 8th Avenue subway, down to Penn Station. Well, they had different areas where Army groups were meeting and Marine groups were meeting, were Navy groups. So I saw the Navy group, and there was a chief petty officer, and he had a list. So I went over to him. I said, I think I'm to go with you. And he said, give me your name. Yes, he said, all right, I have it on my list, Richard Cornish. Okay. So we stood around and talked, and then they blew a whistle, and down the steps we went, down into the lower level.
So you said goodbye to the mall, and then you went down the steps.
I had to say goodbye to my family and Taylor and Newt. And downstairs we went.
What were you
lower
feeling?
levels.
What were you feeling at this time? Were you afraid or just sad?
Well, it was a mixture of being excited, and yet the one sour grape in the whole thing was I'm leaving Violet Taylor. Basically, I would have somehow wanted to still stay around Pearl River and go with her.
I mean, did she know it was serious, considered serious, and you considered it serious also? Going to blossom into something?
More or less semi-serious.
Okay.
She was young, pretty, and I had the gut feeling, sure, I'm going off and she'll be with somebody else, which more or less happened, but that was another story.
What was her age?
My age.
Exactly.
We're both the same age.
Okay.
So downstairs we went, got in this train, and we went upstate, all through the mountains. And as we went, they had big searchlights up front of the train, going through the mountains, up the Lehigh River. When we came through Allentown, by the way. We came through Allentown after we left New York. But we went upstate, up past Albany and up into the mountains. And it went slow. For some reason they ran slow. I guess because it was a troop train. So we pulled into the Navy Yard at what's called Sampson Naval Training Center.
All right, let's stop here and we'll continue. That's the next segment.